All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome all of you to this regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, December 16th, 2013. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the committee. I'm joined by my colleagues Mitchell Englander and Bob Blumenfield, and we're ready to begin today's agenda. Just to give a brief overview, items 1 through 5 are closed session items. Members, I would propose item 6 as a candidate for consent approval, unless members have any questions or concerns about that. And seeing none, item 6 will be approved on consent. The regular agenda items are number 7, of course, the second Rfsr, which is what most people are here for today. And then item 8, we'll hear a report from the CAO. It's been our practice to review the FSR at the outset to determine what departments members would like to ask questions of, so that we can dismiss those for whom we don't have any questions of early. And what I'd propose to do is we go to that item now for that limited purpose. We review the departments that we're going to have questions of, allow everyone else to get back to work, then we'll hold that item on the desk, go to closed session, finish our closed session so we can get our attorneys back to work, and then we'll come back and complete the FSR discussion, if that works for both of you. All right, so let's go ahead and go down the list. And Mr. Blumenfield, do you have a sense of which departments you'd like to call special?
Well, I'm assuming we're going to talk about the fire department and the police department.
Certainly.
And also GSD.
Okay. All right. To that, I would add the city attorney and the clerk. And Mr. Englander, do you have anything?
What's left?
We'll see when they all get up and go.
I think with those, you've captured it all.
All right. So that'll be the fire department, police department, city attorney, the clerk, and general services. And if you were not among those, thank you very much for coming down. We appreciate your being here. We'll contact you if we have any other questions.
Mr. Chair, I believe the department's representation had an item they wanted to bring up during discussion.
Okay. Well, if they would like to stay, they are more than welcome to stay.
Okay.
Really? That's all the progress we made? One guy left? Wow. Well, I did my best. Okay, we see a few. Okay, there's a few others going. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Appreciate your coming down. With that, we're going to go into our closed session items. Is there anybody here wishing to be heard on closed session items? If so, raise your hand. If not, public comment on the closed session items 1 through 5 is now closed. And as we retire to the other room to consider those items, if anybody would like to be heard on any of the agenda items, please fill out a card and bring it forward to the clerk. And members, why don't we go ahead and move to the other room for closed session at this time. Okay, thank you all very much for your patience. I apologize, closed session took a bit longer than expected. Mr. Seha, did you want to report out results from closed session?
Yes, and item number 4, it's the city attorney report relative to requests for additional funding and authority for various outside council contracts. There are recommendations that need to be read into the record.
Ann Haley, City Attorney's Office. We have asked for a transfer of $3,860,633 to be transferred to the outside counsel line item in the City Attorney Fund number 100 for various outside counsel contracts. We'd ask, too, that we extend the term of a contract with Liebert Cassidy and another contract with Burke Williams and Sorensen, and for authority to enter into a new contract with Grinnis Martin, Stein and Richland, and another contract with the firm of Best and Krieger. And all of this is reflected in the agenda item, today's number 4, and tomorrow's council agenda number 49.
Yes, thank you. And I want to again applaud the city attorney for the aggressive steps that he and your office are taking to try to reduce the cost of outside counsel.
Thank you.
Members, anything? We have to vote on that here.
Yes.
Okay, so it'll be the without objection, it will be the action of the committee to approve the recommendation. Thank you very much. Okay, so why don't we go next then to the FSR, item number 7.
Item number 7 is the City Administrative Officer report relative to the second financial status
actually,
report
Sorry, go ahead.
for fiscal year 2013-14.
And before we hear the report, we have 2 cards, so we'll go ahead and take those first. The first card is Jim McQuiston, followed by Mike McCosker. Mr. McQuiston, welcome.
Jim McQuiston. One thing that struck me by this is using the Fund for Economic Uncertainties to cover budget stabilization. We have other funds for that, and it seemed to me inappropriate to be using that particular fund as it was. Economic uncertainties are things like earthquakes and major dam breaks and things like that, which are so uncertain you can't budget for them. The other thing that really bothered me is cutting off the 11 ambulances, because we're saving $14 million, which we have plenty of money in the other funds we could cover if we wanted to. We're going to be killing probably some of our people, and we're going to save $300,000 by paying off a police thing for $15 million. It seems like we have our ideas out of balance there. So those 2 items I think we ought to take a look at, especially. The other thing that I was going to say, the budget looks like it's in pretty good shape. I think there's a little bit of crying wolf in here, and I'm not concerned about what's going to happen with the budget this year. As far as our so-called budget out of balance bit, we always budget peculiarly in the city, and once you get used to that, why, it doesn't look like it's an unbalanced budget anymore.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. McCosker, you prefer to pass? Okay, thank you very much. That brings us then to our report of our FSR. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Maria Gutierrez with the City Administrative Officer. Before you is the second FSR. It is not a traditional FSR in that it doesn't include a write-up for every department. What we do is we focus on the four-year outlook, and we make revisions based on updated labor scenarios. In this FSR, in the last FSR, we had assumed certain labor concessions that are no longer realized in the current year. Without those labor concessions, we are now projecting that deficit for next year is increasing from $153 million to $242. This increase is estimated at approximately $88 million, and it's comprised of about $38 million from the inability to achieve salary adjustments and the health plan contribution concessions that were not realized. It also includes the restoration of salary funding for the deputy city attorneys of approximately $5 million. That includes both salaries and pensionable costs. It also includes larger projected sworn overtime costs of an additional $45 million. This report also identifies approximately $24 million in expenditure shortfalls and major unbudgeted expenses. This is a slight decrease from the approximately $25 million that we identified in the first FSR. The recommendations in this report would reduce that $24 million deficit to approximately $15.58 million. Major deficits are identified for the fire department of approximately $13.2 million, and this is resulting from the continuation of the unfunded ambulance augmentation plan, as well as the delayed implementation of the 40-hour work week for sworn personnel at the fire dispatch center. We continue to project a $4.6 million deficit for the public health initiative. These would be costs to the city clerk replacing the initiative ordinance for the creation of the new city public health department in the June ballot. The police department deficit of $3.8 million that we reported in the first FSR is now projected to be eliminated, but this is because of savings resulting from a sworn salary surplus that is tied to a $10,000 sworn hiring goal that is currently unknown whether or not we will be able to reach that goal. There's a projected increase in the city attorney deficit from $2 million to $3.4 million, and this is due to unfunded compensation adjustments and authorized hiring. We are now reporting a $2.2 million deficit for general services in leasing and equipment accounts. And lastly, the Department of Transportation is reporting a slight decrease in its previously projected deficit from $0.88 million to $0.58 million due to unfunded compensation adjustments. Key recommendations in this report include instructions for fire, general services, and transportation to report back with their respective plans for addressing their deficits. There is an instruction that council and mayor instruct the fire chief to discontinue the unfunded augmentation plan immediately, the ambulance augmentation plan. This would generate savings of approximately $5 million through the year end to partially offset the fire department's $13.2 million deficit. There is an instruction that the chief of police be instructed to pay down $15 million in bank sworn overtime based on a plan to be developed by department management in consultation with the CAO. We recommend that this pay down occur by March 1st, 2014. Related to this is a recommendation to transfer $15 million from the unappropriated balance to partially pay down bank sworn overtime. There is an appropriation of $3.4 million that is recommended to the city attorney for unfunded salary adjustments and authorized hiring, as well as a $580,000 appropriation to the city attorney for the neighborhood prosecutor program positions. If these transfers are approved, the UB reserve for economic uncertainties is reduced to approximately $7.52 million. We also identify possible solutions for future FSRs that could further reduce our $24 million deficit. Potential solutions include approximately $1 million in fire salary savings, as well as the remaining $7.52 million in the UB reserve for economic uncertainties. Regarding revenue, as of November, our current year revenue is approximately $17 million above planned receipts. However, this variance is largely attributed to departmental receipts coming in earlier than planned. We want to point out a technical or a typographical error on recommendation number 10 related to the target date for the pay down of bank sworn overtime of $15 million. There's reference to a March 1st. We want to clarify that our intent is March 1st, 2014.
would be hard to meet otherwise.
Correct.
Okay. Anything further? Does that conclude your report?
If you have any other questions, we're here to answer.
Okay. Well, there's, first of all, again, there's a number of things in this FSR that are especially good news. We have a reserve fund that's now at approximately 6.7%. I think I'm looking for that now, but the current reserve is 6.7%, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and that puts us at, I think, about, if I did my math right, somewhere around $88 million above where we would be with our, if we had met our policy goal of 5%, which is a considerable amount of effort to get to that point. And we've worked very hard as a council and with the mayor and the CAO and CLA and our departments to get to the point of that kind of fiscal security. And I think we all should really celebrate the fact that we've done such a good job of not only erasing so much of the structural deficit, but putting ourselves in a very good position to be able to deal with some of the ups and downs that we'll inevitably go through in the future as well. The other piece of pretty good news that I noted in this that should be highlighted is the increase in revenues that we've had, particularly in our economically sensitive revenue sources. The TOT, sales tax particularly shows significant gains. The documentary transfer tax is up over 20% higher than budgeted estimates. So those are some good signs that the economy is continuing to recover and that we're on the right track. With that, members, general questions or comments, or if you want to go right into departments, that's fine too. Mr. Blumenfield?
Just generally on the deficit, we break it down between structural and one-time. How much of it is structural and how much is one-time?
Our deficit of $24 million for the fire department, the 13.2 that we're reporting would be ongoing unless actions are taken to seize the unfunded ambulance augmentation program. So that 13.2, unless an action is taken, it's an ongoing. The public health initiative, it's an election cost of $4.6 million. If this measure is approved, there would be a series of additional costs that would be incurred that we identified separately in a report to Mayor and Council regarding this initiative as a whole. So that 4.6 would be a one-time. On the city attorney, the unfunded compensation adjustments, well, those costs are ongoing. And the general services, I believe that 2.2 could include a mixture of one-time and possibly some ongoing. And the transportation would be ongoing, the 0.58 million.
So really the bulk of it is ongoing. It's just the only thing you mentioned with the 4.6 was the only one time, maybe a little piece of the 2.2. Is that right?
Correct.
Not just because different solutions for different problems. So that's it in the general category.
Okay, Mr. Englander?
No, I'm good on general comment.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we excuse me. I think we're all going to have a number of questions on fire and police in particular. So, if we could start with the easier ones, and I'd like to ask the city clerk to come up first, please, just to address this issue of the special election costs.
Holly Walcott, Interim City Clerk. What can I answer for you today?
Good afternoon. I continue to be amazed that we are going down the road of potentially having to pay over $4 million for a citizen-driven initiative to transfer public health responsibilities from the county to the city, an action that would turn our budget upside down, create probably over $300 million in ongoing obligations, and change our revenue streams and completely transform basically the core mission of the city. But that being said, so there is some question.
How do you feel about it?
There is some question, I think, of whether that, whether the sponsors of that measure, I think, are continuing to push it forward, and yet there's court action to determine whether or not it's going to qualify for the ballot, I understand. Is that right?
On January 24th at 8:30 in the morning is the first hearing. So if it is not resolved in that day, and it may be resolved at the hearing, that's when the motions will be heard. But then if not, then the trial will be held February 3rd. So we're anticipated to have an answer prior to incurring any costs. But hopefully it goes our way.
When would we need to begin incurring costs in anticipation of this election going forward?
It would be sometime in February. The city clerk wouldn't start incurring costs, but we would start incurring costs with the county in sometime in February.
Okay, so there's really no wiggle room there. There's going to be a trial in February. We start incurring costs right after that unless there's some resolution before that.
Correct, but we are anticipating that that's why the court calendar was so expedited, because they understood the impact. But the proponents have started a second initiative process, and that is, instead of a department, this time it's for a health commission, which is substantially different than a department. So, but these are the same proponents.
All right, I think my further questions on that area probably should be in closed session then with the city attorney. So I've got nothing further on that. Mr. Blumenfield?
On the health commission angle, what would the cost of that to us?
That hasn't been determined yet. They have only started the process. They have, excuse me, I'm turning it off, but who's buzzing? They've only started the process of, they've turned in a petition, and it's been approved for circulation, but we wouldn't determine the cost until they actually had all the signatures and turned it in.
Well, to that point, though, what would be the earliest time that that petition would be able to produce a ballot measure?
It would be too late for June. It would have to go in November if they had the signatures in time.
So it could still go forward in this fiscal year?
It could, yes.
Okay.
So it may not be a preemption, it may be a contingent.
I guess it would be the coming fiscal year. Yeah,
Right, or the
fiscal
council
year.
would have the, I mean, if it were written in such a way that the council found it acceptable, they could adopt it without it going to the ballot.
That's what I was going to, yeah.
Okay.
And then it would incur no cost.
Okay. Anything further? That's true. All right.
City
Thank
clerk
you.
can go.
Yes, you can. Thank you very much. All right. Why don't we go next to General Services? I think Mr. Blumenfield, did you have questions on GST?
I was just trying to get a better sense about the 2.2 and there was higher costs for the space, or if you could walk through what happened.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Val Meloff with the Department of General Services. And your inquiry is about the leasing costs, I take it? Okay. Basically, we're in a situation where we had some delays in scheduled move-out dates and unanticipated increases in month-to-month leases, as well as various costs for some tenant improvements at the East LA Courthouse and at the Long Beach courthouses. And we discovered that we had some prior year utility bills that were still outstanding with Caltrans, as well as we also have an ongoing legal dispute regarding a building lease at the Garland building, and all those factors are contributing to a $1.7 million deficit.
And they're all things that just came up since the last budget.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I was actually a little unclear on how some of those expenses were not anticipated, though, in this budget, because it sounded like it was ordinary maintenance, for example, on the 7 LAPD helicopters and so on. Would that not have been something that was anticipated as part of the maintenance schedule?
Actually, it isn't ordinary maintenance on the LAPD helicopters. And I don't believe that decision has been finally made.
Okay.
But there's discussion of extending the life cycle of those helicopters. And if that were to occur, there would be additional expense, approximately $500,000 in our parts account. This matter was discussed at the end of the fiscal year, at the end of the budget process last year, but a final determination wasn't made. And so we're bringing it up because we are having discussions with LAPD about this, and they're indicating they would like to move forward.
I see. It's probably, well, Mr. Englander.
No, go ahead if you finish.
No, yeah, I'm finished.
If we could also, we don't have to bring it up in terms of the discussion at this point, but meet in the near future, either year-end or first thing in January, about some of the, I believe we were able to, in this year's budget, put some additional dollars into some facility maintenance for civic center areas. And
Yes.
I know some of those discussions are taking place
Yes.
to find out what needs to be done, and so I wanted to make sure that, okay, you were aware of it.
And I'm aware of those
Excellent.
discussions,
Great.
and we're going to work a little bit more closely with various representatives to make sure that we understand fully. And
Great, excellent.
One last thing. In the last FSR hearing, we had discussed getting a report back with a fuel cost analysis.
Correct.
Is that completed?
I'm sorry.
Is that completed?
Yes, I was under the impression that had already been released.
Okay.
But I
haven't seen
will
it.
check
Oh,
again.
Maybe my staff
and,
has, but I haven't. Okay. You have it, Matt? Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Blumenfield, because I think you had requested that last time. You got the fuel. That's all right. The fuel cost analysis over the last 5 years. I think you had requested that at the last FSR. So I just want to make sure you were satisfied with where we were with that. So.
Yeah, I don't know if we've updated each other. Maybe I need to, I'll circle back with you on that offline.
Okay. Well, we're happy to provide you with another copy.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Council members, we just wanted to point out, on behalf of the CAO, just to clarify that $2.5 million shortfall that's reported for field equipment expense, we are still working with the department to identify the nature of that deficit and which are tied to special funding sources.
Oh,
so
good.
there's still some work that we need to do on our end, working with the department to get that further refined.
Great.
So.
Very good. Thank you. I think I had called City Attorney special, but it was mainly to talk about the outside counsel expenses, which we've actually already dealt with. So, members, I don't know if you have anything further for the City Attorney?
I don't.
No? Thank you very much. Thanks for staying. All right, so that brings us then to Fire Department. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I think we'll start with our Public Safety Chair.
Well, actually, if we could just start with the fire department, have them open it up and address the CAO's recommendation as well.
Okay.
Maybe what I'll do is start with page 18. There's a slight correction that the department wanted to make, and that was with respect to the indication that the department was going to have a $1.1 million deficit in the sworn overtime account. That is not going to be the case. The anticipated sworn overtime deficit was based on the assistance provided to other fire agencies, and we are anticipating that the department is going to be fully reimbursed by the end of the fiscal year. The other statements with respect to the ambulance augmentation and the deficit that will be accrued of approximately $10 million, in addition to the $4 million deficit for the dispatch center, in fact, is the case. And if the committee would like us to comment on the CAO's recommendation with respect to eliminating the ambulance augmentation. We have not had the opportunity to discuss that issue with the fire chief, given the fact that he has been out of town.
And just, okay, to go over some of these highlights then, and without doing too much of a deep dive on this, it would be first and foremost my recommendation that we not support the CAO's recommendation yet at this time. If we can put that off until we've had an opportunity to have the fire chief come back as well. And as well, I believe we have a third-party consultant report that we've fully funded. They're well on their way to concluding that report, to look at all of these issues in terms of dispatch and really almost all protocols and processes and procedures for the department. When is that due back?
Our understanding from the CAO, you're talking about the PA Consulting?
Correct.
Yes.
Our understanding from the CAO is that the report is to be released at the end of January.
Okay. So if we could, Mr. Chair, if we could hold the fire department and hold that particular recommendation off until we have had time to meet with the fire chief as well as get the at least the initial results back from PA Consulting, which will come back to both public safety and to this committee. I think that would be helpful.
I absolutely agree with that. It's important for a number of reasons. First, we don't have our fire chief here, and he suffered a loss in his family for which we express our condolences to him, of course. I'd like to have him here to be able to comment on the deployment from a policy perspective, also to see whether the augmented ambulance plan has succeeded to the extent that the department had anticipated, what the benefits were from there. We also are missing two members of this committee who I'm sure are going to want to weigh in on this particular issue as well, because they're currently out of town as well, so I'd like them to be here for full participation. And then we have the PA Consulting report. So for all of those reasons, I think it's important that we defer any action on the CAO's recommendation with regard to the ambulance augmentation.
For the record, that's recommendation number 6 and on page 11 of the report.
I do want to say that we fully recognize, and I appreciate the CAO's flagging the issue in this FSR once again, we do fully recognize that the decision that the prior chief made in May to augment ambulances at the expense of staffing on some of the light forces was one that this council fully recognized would require additional funding if we were to maintain both of those deployment elements, which we provided for the remainder of the fiscal year. And we recognize that that is still going forward as of this moment without funding. That's not something that I'm prepared to address until we've heard back whether that continues to be the direction that the department intends to take. And if so, then we're going to have to work on a plan moving forward to restore those services in a way that's fully budgeted.
With that, thank you. I appreciate that. And adding to that, those elements that are important and our condolences do go out to the chief as well. I appreciate you mentioning that, Mr. Chair. On AB 678, it shows that our revenue is down, and we're not meeting the goals and anticipated reimbursements from that. Can you highlight that and speak to that and why? That's on AB 678 on page 19.
Yes, we're projecting that the revenues that we'll be receiving from AB 678 will be approximately $18 million, and that is attributable to the requirements that were ultimately approved by the Center for Medicare Services.
And how are we doing on ambulance reimbursement and collections?
We're actually on target on every single one of our projected revenue items with the exception of AB 678.
And the 40-hour work week for fire dispatch is at impasse, so we can anticipate that nothing's going to happen there. Is that correct?
Correct. That also, the CAO was planning on submitting the impasse to the ERC. That is also on hold pending the outcome of the PA consulting study.
Why would that be pending the outcome of the PA consulting study? Shouldn't that just go concurrently?
That's one of the items that they're reviewing is the staffing at the dispatch center.
Right. Okay.
Follow-up question to one of the ones you were asking about this.
Go ahead.
The AB 678, you said the reason why was because CMS hasn't done their part. What's the reason why we're behind on that?
I'm sorry, in terms of
the reimbursement money for the AB 678.
in terms of the differential between what was projected and what we're actually going to be receiving.
Yeah.
There were certain criteria that the department was expecting that the Center for Medicare Services would approve that would be eligible for reimbursement, and the criteria was not approved by CMS. One of the items, for example, was that we were assuming we would get reimbursed for Medi-Cal patients who are transported to an HMO, and that is a huge component of the expected reimbursement. And with that item being excluded, the amount of revenues that we would be eligible to receive has significantly reduced.
And is there an appeal process that we can go through to try to get that, get them to change that decision, or were our expectations flawed at the beginning, or do we feel like that there's something that needs to be appealed?
We have had the highest levels of political intervention, and it has not been successful. And we're talking about Senator Feinstein and Kathleen Sebelius, and so I don't anticipate that any level of appeal is going to be in any way, shape, or form successful.
So Sebelius dealt with this directly, and is there anything else you could shed on that? Because obviously we all deal with them and would love to help out any way we can if there's a way to help on that. But you're saying it's been exhausted and it's over.
That is correct.
Okay.
One more thing on this. If you could give us a report back on how that's been exhausted, if you can put it in writing exactly what's been done for the record so we can actually look at it and see if there's a way to revisit that. We're talking about $16 million, and it's not that easy to just dismiss it. We're not suggesting that there's any inaccuracies in that, but perhaps there's other opportunities and ways we can fix it moving forward, either future legislation for reimbursements in the future years. It may be a loss this one time, but we've got to look at consistently and constantly going after those funds for reimbursement. So if we can get a report back on that, if that's okay with...
Sure, I think that would be helpful. I have to say I'm convinced that the department has banged its head against the wall to the greatest extent possible to get this money, but I continue to be amazed that it's taking so long to get the gears of government to actually churn out the check that everyone agrees they owe us. So it's just, this was supposed to have arrived before the end of the last fiscal year. Now we're not going to get it clearly even in this calendar year. It's just baffling to me that this has taken so long, especially now that the formulas have all pretty much been agreed upon, and there shouldn't be a lot of ambiguity remaining. So it would be helpful to have that, I think, Mr. Englander, so we can see where else we can.
And I'm reading this a little differently as an actual reduction of money that we won't receive. Is that correct?
But we're not even getting the money that we should receive.
Correct. So it's both. So I think we need a report back on an update on AB 678, the totality of what's happened, where we're at, what we're eligible for and haven't received, and then what they're claiming we're not eligible for and why. So we can look at that. And I think that's critically important. And then the last thing, or maybe the last thing, is the Harbor Department. There's a continuous discussion, and I'm not sure what the resolution is or the disposition of the outstanding reimbursement issues, but those are upwards of $170 million and growing. Can you speak to that?
The amount that the Harbor Department has disallowed is on the overhead rate, and the CAO's office is providing assistance to our department for further conversations with the staff in the Harbor Department to try to get that amount.
Those are for services and rendered that we have that we're deploying there. Is that a reimbursement for, and we're continuing to have folks assigned to that department, and there's still this challenge? This is a new item that I haven't heard of or seen until I've seen it on this FSR. So I have not been briefed on this. I don't know if anybody on the committee has, or if this has come to committee as an issue previously. That there was an issue.
Just for clarification, the $166 million is the revised total revenue for the department, inclusive of the change in the AB 678 you just discussed, and the other matters, including the harbor.
Oh, I see. That's the totality of all of it. So what's the breakout of from just
The
harbor?
Harbor Department is $1.6 million.
It's $1.6 million. Okay, and then the last thing, then if you can fill me in on that, we can do that offline. I just want to get up to speed on that $1.6 million. I also understand that there's a contract for, I didn't see it in here, for the city of San Fernando that is in arrears, and I believe perhaps reimbursement for services as well. Is that correct, or are they up to date in payment?
I don't have the report in front of me, but they are in arrears to a certain extent, and we're continuing to engage in conversations with them so that they will provide full reimbursement.
Is there a reason that wouldn't be in the FSR?
Excuse me?
If they're in arrears, is there a reason it's not in the FSR?
Excuse me, Salvador Martinez, Fire Department. What we're doing with that one, Council Member, is the agreement that you'll be presented shortly would cover all of the back due amount that the city owes us, as well as on a move forward basis that would be paid within this year. So their arrears would be covered before the end of the fiscal year. And then on a move forward basis, we'd be establishing the new rates for 14, 15 and beyond.
So, okay. So that would be caught up through this year if we approve the new contract?
Correct. Correct.
And if that happened, you said this fiscal year, you're saying, or this calendar year?
By the end of the fiscal year, I have to go back and check, we would be basically getting caught up on, if not fully caught up on, what they were in arrears in. But I believe it was fully caught up.
Okay. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Blumenfield, anything else?
Is it appropriate to talk about the ambulance issue? We're going to wait for that.
If there's something else you'd like to add on that.
Well, I want to get a sense also what that proposal would mean, particularly for the West Valley area in terms of response times. What would be the real impact of if we were to implement that plan? I have a lot of fear about that for the whole city, but in particular for my area, the West Valley, where we were further spread out. So I want to either get a report back, or if there's something you could say directly about that now, I want to hear about it.
Is it safe to assume that that would be part of the PA consulting report back as well, as far as specific impacts on response times in different parts of the city? I hope that it would be, because I'm sure we all share that same sentiment. So I would hope that it's at that level of granular detail to really talk about impacts on particular regions of the city.
Is it in that report, or should we just...
Well, we don't have it back yet.
We don't have it back, so I guess whether or not it's in that report, we will certainly want to get that information.
Right.
If I could, I don't believe that there's going to be a tremendous level of detail, I believe, in that report, and on everything from response times to deployment to dispatch to types of equipment to vehicle locator tracking systems to whether certain things are civilianized or not, staffing levels, you name it, in great detail, the best practices, and in terms of actual response times under scenarios, what we may or may not do based on region and council district. I don't believe that will be in there, but I believe there will be interpretation based on functions and staffing as it pertains to all levels of service in the fire department that will be able to be extrapolated from that report based on expertise to look at scenarios. So with that, there will be a tremendous, I don't want to say, I'm not writing the report certainly, but I've met with PA Consulting. That was the scope. The scope was a little different based on what the council approved and funded. The scope is very in-depth, but not to, but to a different detail and a different level. I just want to make sure that everybody was aware of that.
And certainly it would be the beginning of that discussion that we would have for possible follow-up reports or determinations to be made about whether or not to change the policy until we have that kind of level of report. The one other issue that I would want to signal that I have a real strong interest in when it comes to ambulances is we're augmenting our ambulance service at the same time that many of our ambulances and their crews are sitting, waiting in hospital emergency rooms throughout Los Angeles County and waiting and waiting and waiting. And this is not just a Los Angeles problem, this is a national problem, I recognize. But I think that we really have to start thinking outside of the normal boxes about how to address that wait time problem. And I hope that there's going to be recommendations in that report or from the department about ways that we can address that wait time, because it doesn't make sense to me to continue to augment ambulance service and then have them spend more of their time cooling their jets in emergency rooms.
I believe that's exactly what they're going to be looking at. Those kinds of issues, wall time issues, I believe you're referring to, is known in the industry as well. Dispatch times, all of those elements, that's exactly what they're looking to.
And then as to the impasse issue on the dispatch center, I don't know how insightful the PA Consulting report is going to be on that particular issue, but if the issue is at impasse, I would hope that we bring that to EERC as quickly as we possibly can so that we can move forward with some resolution one way or the other. This is costing us $250,000 a month, and we need to have some resolution.
With that, if that could be the recommendation, I would support that. I don't think there's any reason it couldn't go to EERC. I don't think we have to wait till the PA Consulting comes out and says and recognizes the fact that the department is and the union's at impasse over that issue. They might be suggesting something different or a different model, at which case the city may or may not implement a policy change or not. There's going to be a lot of dialogue and conversation about the report itself, and I imagine that will be ongoing, but I don't believe there's any reason we should hold up having the discussion at EERC.
I agree.
One other, just it's probably a very basic question, but the ambulances are all operated on overtime basis and not using just the regular time. Why is that, or how is that? Explain to me that process.
What we did was Chief Deputy Darren Palacios, we took the staffing in May. Chief Cummings wanted to open 11 ambulances at no cost. So we took the staffing from 22 of the companies and opened up those 11. We basically took one person from each light force and formed those 11 rescue ambulances. So what the council asked us to do was hire the overtime for that person that we removed and put on that ambulance to continue hiring overtime for that person. So this truck staffing or the light force staffing would remain at 6.
And then it's just done. So there's no way to do it without having more folks to do it otherwise. It just seems like that's another cause for this cost inflation.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you. Appreciate your patience. Before we go to PD, DOT just had a really simple change, I think. So let's bring up DOT to read in their proposed change. We can act on that.
Good afternoon, council members.
Good afternoon.
The requested change is to transfer $600,000 within the Gas Tax Fund 100, account 3360 Signal Supplies, to account 3350 Paint and Sign Maintenance. This will provide the department the flexibility to fund and contract out the backlog of striping and pavement markings on local streets where Bureau of Street Services has performed slurry-sealed projects.
So, members, this has been a pretty high priority for every council member I know to get the striping done more quickly. Any questions about it, Mr. Englander?
Yeah, I got a lot of questions on it, actually. Do you have anything in writing on this?
Yes, I'm sorry, do I have
Something in writing that spells out exactly what it is you're looking to do? And you say there's a backlog of striping?
There's a backlog of striping and pavement messages, signs within the residential areas.
What kind of message signs?
Those would be stop ahead, school crossing ahead, limit lines, all the signs, all of the pavement messages that you would normally see in residential areas.
I'd like to actually get a really detailed report on this. One of my concerns is how much money are we taking in right now on revenue and gas tax this year?
I don't have that number, sir.
In the previous year?
No, I don't know.
Okay. If we could hold this in committee and bring it back with a full report is what I would ask, and I'm going to go through a few reasons why. One, I believe the revenue from gas tax is a depleting revenue stream that goes down every single year, and it goes down because we have more cars on the road actually getting better gas mileage, which is a good thing for the environment and our dependence on foreign oil and et cetera. But having said that, the revenue stream that goes back into fixing streets creates a further backlog. We've also lost Prop 1C funds that have sunset, ARA funds that are gone, and without going through all the revenue streams that go into the backlog of fixing streets, they keep going down. Hence, we have a 70-year backlog, or 8,700 miles of failed streets. So to take what should be specifically earmarked for fixing roads, where Angelenos who are driving on them, that cost per vehicle goes up in extraordinary costs, approximately $100 a year. We're at an average of about $850 a year in maintenance for vehicle ownership and operation in the city of Los Angeles, the highest of any city in the country. Taking gas tax for street signs or anything else for that matter other than fixing streets is a concern. While I understand we need signs and there are other issues. So I'd like to see a full report back to this committee with what was the spirit of gas tax, what it was supposed to be used for specifically, and then how far, going back the last several years, how much money in revenue has it been generating? I believe it's gone down every single year before we earmark it for something else, even though those are very serious issues. There's other ways we can look for funds, but the gas tax money, I believe, should go directly into fixing streets.
If I could clarify, sir, it's staying within the gas tax fund. It's just basically moving from the signal supplies to the pavement messages and signs within gas tax.
And that's, yeah, if we could
It's just staying within the same fund. It's not moving from gas tax to any other fund. It's staying within gas tax. It's moving from signal supplies, so instead of buying more signal poles, we'll be using the money to buy materials and contract to put in the pavement message signs around schools and around limit lines and crosswalks within residential areas.
And again, if we could look at those particular items for that to come back in a little more detail, I think it'd be helpful.
We can certainly do that. I was only asking if we had made a promise at another meeting where we would basically take care of the backlog within 60 days. And in order to do that, we needed to transfer funds into this particular account to be able to contract out. So just wanted to alert you to that.
And I'm in deference to Mr. England, I'm happy to, I guess, hold this to get some further detail rather than doing this sort of on the fly. I will say that I think particularly in the situations that you've specified, striping of streets that have been slurry sealed, that's clearly we've had an imbalance of expenditures on slurry sealing and expenditures on the striping, and that's why we often deal with this issue of having the striping falling behind the slurry sealing, which creates a significant public safety risk. And so I think if we're going to continue with slurry sealing, which we should, because it's important pavement maintenance program, then we have to have sufficient funds also to immediately stripe as well. So I appreciate that you've moved forward on this. Let's hold that recommendation then for the time being. Maybe, I assume you are probably prepared to bring that back very quickly to
Yes,
we
yes.
don't need to wait for the next FSR.
No.
You can bring that
We'll
next.
come
to
back with a full report on the gas tax, the revenues both this year and last year, and then the trend that's been occurring, how the money's been used within gas tax.
So if we could have that back at, when's our next, how many budget committee meetings do we have for the rest of the year? This is it. So then if we can come back in January with
Yes,
that
year,
report,
we'll
that'd
come
be
back
great.
in a year, we'll report back. Okay.
And then to that, what the needs are you're looking for with the signage and what you've promised, maybe I'm sure there's ways, and those are critically important and public safety issues as well, that we can identify other funds. I just want to ensure we're not setting any kind of new precedent, and happy to meet with you offline on that as well. And, as we talked about, 1C depleting and all the other revenue streams going down, we've got to ensure we protect whatever little funds are left. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to add to your concern about gas tax, the other reason that it's a depleting source is because it's a fixed rate per gallon. It doesn't fluctuate like sales tax with the price of what's purchased. So a lot of people think, well, gas prices are up, so gas tax must be up. It's not the case. It's a fixed sum per gallon, and our efficiency is going up, our revenues are going down.
And on that, just if we're going to put it all on the record, at 38 cents per gallon, half of it, 18 cents, goes to the federal government, the rest goes to the state, some to the county. We net a little under, around 3 cents. That hasn't changed in almost 20 years.
That's right. All right, that brings us then, I think, to the police department. Is anybody left from the police department? Okay.
I think he called it.
Mr. Blumenfield, do you want to start with police?
I was in the bank time issue, in particular, how are we ensuring that through the $15 million pay down that we're doing this we're getting the most bang for our buck? Are we paying down the folks who are at the end of the line, or are we picking and choosing who we're paying down? How do we make that decision?
I can turn it over to Laura to give you a little bit more detail, but we are still working with the Chief of Police and the CAO's office to identify what will be the biggest bang for our buck, so to speak, so that we're looking at a variety of different scenarios, because even buying some of the banks down, we also have to be cautious because the banks will start building up again. So we're looking at all the different scenarios.
In a nutshell, that's correct. I've been asked to take a look at different ways of doing it, and then and as indicated in the report, we're going to need to work with the CAO on, or actually confer with them about what we end up doing. It's their wish also that we get the biggest bang for our buck. So I think we'll come to a resolution that'll be acceptable to everybody.
Okay, and then that'll come back through this committee?
No, I don't believe so. I think that's the instruction that we just work with the CAO.
Yes, the current instruction is that the department as management come up with a plan to do the pay down in consultation with our office.
Well, at the very least, maybe not for approval, but like, report on how that's being done, and confident you can come up with the best bang for your buck, but I'm curious on what it is, and then that may...
And how we'll implement it.
How it's implemented, that may lead to further policy issues, too, in terms of how we deal with this. And that's the bigger question. We talked about this last time around, is, why 15 million? Why don't we... How much are we really paying in interest is the question I asked last time on this banked money. In essence, I know there's not an interest rate directly, but somebody banks $1 today and they get raises over the next couple of years, those hours go up in price. And I'm assuming that they go up in price at a faster rate than if we had just borrowed the money at a low interest rate and paid ourselves back. And so I'm trying to understand the actual cost of this and maybe come up with a better way of doing it.
I've been working with the CAO. They've been working with their bond counsel on the best approach. I don't think they've completed that analysis. So they are working on, I think you brought that up at an earlier meeting, and they are working on that to get back to the committee.
Right. No, I did bring it up at the earlier meeting. It just seems, whenever we can make money just by basically refinancing, debt in the city, and we can find places to do that, that's essentially free money. And there may be a lot of it hanging out in the bank dollars account. And that would have the dual purpose of actually paying the officers out, which is a policy goal. We want them to get paid, and we want that to happen. They want that to happen. And we want to save money. So how do I asked about it last time, how do I light a fire under that to make it happen?
We are working with our financial advisors to come up with what would be feasible within the realm of what the use of these funds are for. Normally when we issue debt, it's for a long-term liability and something that is one-time in nature, so to speak. In this case, it's almost as if you're managing your multiple credit cards and you're just transferring one balance from one high interest rate card to a lower interest rate card. You're not really, addressing the principal. You're just kind of moving around the liability. So it's,
but that's still a smart move.
It's smart, yes, but we have to recognize that. We have to recognize that it's not solving the actual problem, as opposed to actually buying down with cash the liability that is, in essence, solving it. We would know that if we were to issue, we wouldn't be able to issue long-term debt for this, obviously. It would have to be something that's short-term, commercial paper perhaps. We have proposed some of these ideas in the past when we had the buy-down of, or rather the E-RIP payments that were proposed a couple years ago, and I'm not sure if anybody on this actual committee was here back then, but it was the intent of that council not to use commercial paper for that E-RIP payment, which again would have been a one-time payment because of it just didn't seem appropriate that we weren't using cash for that one-time payment. So we are looking into this. We have financial advisors working out some different scenarios.
And you said it would be obvious that we wouldn't do long-term debt deal with this. That's not obvious to me.
Okay.
In terms of, I'm not sure. It may very well be the case, but I would like to see that out. I just, my gut, I feel like there's a way to refinance it.
Okay.
Better, but I hear what you're saying.
Sure.
For the reasons why it makes sense.
So when would you anticipate that report would be ready? And is the idea to have a kind of a larger architecture for how to resolve the entirety of the problem, or are we looking more at just how to address the sort of immediate need?
You want to go?
Natalie Broad, sales office. We are working on a memo right now that hopefully will go into the next mid-year report that will outline the reasons why you wouldn't do long-term debt and what the financial advisors recommend and what our office would be recommending. In general, you're taking us what we call a soft liability and turning it into a hard liability. Also, there's some questions of whether or not this would be working capital versus real capital, and those are some of the issues that we're looking at. Also, the city just can't issue debt. We have to issue it either through revenue bonds or through a lease. So that's why we would use the commercial paper program. And I'm not quite sure how we would put it into long-term debt, I think is what Ben was saying.
Okay, but if I may, I think what Mr. Blumenfield is saying, we're not asking for a report back as to why we can't do this. I think what we're asking for is a report back as to the long-term strategy for how we deal with a $120 million obligation. What is the department's plan? What are our range of financial options for being able to address this liability that's on the books? Are there ways that we can approach this that are more cost-effective than simply paying it out as these officers retire and so on? Mr. Englander.
One of the things that I pointed out on this and asked for a report back on as well when we went through the budget discussions, not during the last FSR, but during the last budget process when this was, I think it was about $100 million at the time. And then we paid out I think it was 20 million of the budget to pay that down, and it keeps going up because of COLAs for the most part, and continuous banked overtime. So those two are a potent, deadly marriage, if you will, to the structural problem. With that, I asked for an analysis on, even though it may or may not be meet and confer, on an analysis with not just the police department, but all departments that bank any overtime, to come back and say, to look at the ability to set aside and transfer the dollar amount rather than the time. And so it's a conversion where at the end of the year or the end of the DP or the end of the cycle or the pay period, if that was a deployment period, whatever that might be, if somebody had, for example, 5 hours of overtime, it's converted to their actual rate that they collected it at, their current salary, and we banked it based on a dollar amount, which many other municipalities do. That would at least stop the hemorrhaging. The bleeding would continue, where we would continue to grow that pot of funds, but perhaps it was tied to an interest rate or some other way that would at least prevent us from growing it exponentially. What happens now if somebody accrues at a dollar amount on overtime, and say that's $20 an hour, for example, and 3 years down the road they got a 3 or 4% or 5% retroactive cost of living adjustment, that $20 that has been sitting there banked, that whole $20 that was earned while they were receiving and their compensation was $20 would then earn that full COLA as well, and that's growing this exponentially. So if we can look at what it would take to convert it to a possible cash amount of what they're accruing at the time, as well as perhaps there's a way to incentivize them with interest versus the way we're doing it now. But at least different options. I think that needs to be included in the report.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't mean to sound negative. These are just some of the issues we are dealing with. I mean, it's possible. Everything is possible, right?
If it was easy, we'd have done it by now.
That's right.
But could you include that in the report as well?
Well, that may have to come from the CAO will report on the financing aspects of it. I think some of those other aspects have labor components to them, FLSA issues that may require some further analysis.
But again, I asked for that analysis be done from last budget. It was one of the budget items in the request as well. So if we can get that to come back at the same time, I think it would be helpful. So at least let's look at those obstacles. Let's sit down with our labor partners and find out if there's a way, because it's not just PD, but there's a lot of other departments that are affected, way that we can incentivize these employees and actually save some money doing it correctly.
And I'm very interested in the department's long-term plan as well, some of which might involve deployment decisions that change the rate at which overtime is accrued. So that's...
And much of those are linked to what's negotiated in the contract. That's why we really need to be partners with the CAO on this, because they're going to go into negotiations next year.
Right. Okay.
So we will work with them.
Okay.
Councilman, I do want to point out that as we updated the projected deficit for next fiscal year, going from the $153 million deficit to the $242 million, it did include an assumption that there would be additional, as we said, sworn overtime costs associated, and that the intent is to show that we would propose additional buy downs those following years against the $120 million liability we have.
Yeah. The challenge is that if we're only buying down, 10% or so a year, or we're barely catching up because of the cost of living adjustments and inflation and all of the promotions, all that. Because even without a COLA, if an officer promotes,
that's right,
they're going to get paid out at the higher pay as well.
Yeah, and I think those are the discussions, which is again goes back to figuring out if we're going to be banking their dollars, banking them at the rate they accrued them, and then offering still incentives to them for doing that. It still may benefit everybody. And then, okay, so I don't know if you were done on the overtime. Just a couple things. One, while we're at our mid-year in December, The police department follows their cycles on fiscal year, and perhaps not their budget, but their crime numbers. And the crime numbers this year are once again at an all-time low.
Yep.
And want to compliment the department and everybody within the department. It has done just a phenomenal job, and the partners within the outside of the department, the community that has really stepped up with intervention programs, prevention programs. There's so much being done with a collaborative effort.
It's truly a partnership with our community.
Yeah, it's incredible. So I didn't ask for you to bring them with you, but do you know what the end of the year crime stats are?
I don't have the crime stats on me today, but we're just right at about a 5% decrease, which is huge. We're going to be at rates, unbelievable rates in terms of our homicides. We're going to be under 266, knock on wood, which goes back to...
When Charlie was in 5th grade.
When Charlie was in 5th grade. Chief Beck was in 5th grade. But, I mean, literally, that's how long ago we're talking. We're talking in the 50s.
In the 50s. And our population's grown by about 1 million people since then.
Yes, correct. And at least 1 million people since then. Not that he's old.
Yes.
For the record. But I got to be very diplomatic about that.
Be careful there.
Yes.
It came up in a meeting.
Yes. But we are going to be under the sheer number of crimes under any of the other big 5 in the country. So we're really proud of what our officers have done. And really, it does take an entire city to do this. But it really falls on the backs of those guys in the black and whites, and that's where the huge numbers come from on this. So, you know, we do look at everything, and to going back to your previous question, we will be continuously working with the unions and the CAO on how we can get our overtime, if we can get, how we can get it under control. But it really, what we've seen in terms of the drop in crime is absolutely phenomenal in a time when you would have thought crime would have been going up over the last 3-4 years in this country. It has been continuing to go down, so that we are very proud of. Thank you.
We're going to have to keep that in mind going into next year and the following year. It's I won't say impossible, but it's pretty close to that, to continue on that path, because it's not 5% this year. It's 5% on top of the reduction from the previous year, on top of the reduction from the previous year, on top of the reduction from that previous year. 266, which is still too high for homicides, but it was 298, I believe, last year.
Yes.
And if we all remember, in the late 80s, we were at about 1,200 a year. We were the murder capital of the nation, and now we're the safest large city in the nation. With that, if you can just speak a little bit to AB 109 and what that's done cost-wise from a budgetary perspective. I've heard the chief speak to it a little bit. I've heard the department speak to it a little bit, actually at length in detail, but how many officers we have dedicated to early release?
I'd have to ask Laura, do you know the numbers off the top of your head for who's dedicated to that?
I don't have those sorts of numbers. We have overtime details that are associated with it.
Correct.
So I look at it in terms of dollars, not people.
So I've heard the numbers of, we have roughly 150 or so officers equating to anywhere between $25 and $30 million a year, approximately.
It's about 20 to 25 per division-ish, if you look at it broken up evenly, so those numbers are accurate. I'm sure Laura would say that the dollar amount may even be a little larger than that because of the overtime aspect of it.
So if we're spending 30 to 50 million in that ballpark,
yes,
that wasn't budgeted, that wasn't under our sort of purview before.
Correct.
LAPD is doing a phenomenal job. Is there something we should be doing legislatively to ask for reimbursements or additional reimbursements from the state? And since we're taking the largest hit in the state on this, and we're trying to continue to make sure that we maintain, if not reduce further, which would be a miracle, quite frankly, but if we can maintain the crime rates of where they're at today, we're going to need additional dollars to maintain AB 109 services. What can we do? And maybe that's another discussion for another time.
I do think that's
important.
Another discussion for another time, but I do think we need to work collaboratively with all of you, the leaders of the city, to look at what we can do in Sacramento to help offset. Right, just talking about overtime alone, if some funding could go into the overtime on that side of the shop, it would start to bring that. We pay overtime in dollars today versus dollars 5, 10, 15 years from now, and we do know it's costing us some money in overtime.
We do have some overtime that the state did give us.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we got $2 million last year, a little over $2 million last year. We have another $2 million that's in the coffers, ready to go when the current funds run out. So the overtime is being paid for. I think it's a straight cost.
It's a straight cost. So we're getting $2 million out of approximately, 40 to 50 million.
Yeah, right. It's the straight time cost that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Is where the department or the city is not being reimbursed.
And if we've got 150 officers being taken out of their day-to-day functions,
Exactly.
That's their primary function now.
that's their primary function. And that number keeps going up.
Yes.
It keeps going up. And while their 10,000 number keeps going down and that number keeps going up, we're going to run into issues. It's a miracle we're not there yet.
We are probably at the tipping point in terms of with the loss of not able to fill the classes and such.
And so with that also, that is in the report, and I think it's worth at least a mention of discussion.
Yes.
That we're not filling the classes, that we actually have a surplus in that account because we're not hitting the numbers. I'm of the firm belief, and I did hear the mayor on television did the report yesterday, I believe, on Ask the Mayor on Eyewitness Newsmakers, if I could plug that, he discussed that it's most likely it's not the applicants, it's not the applicant pool, it's not the number of applicants we're getting, it's another department, is what I believe his words were, another department. Are we looking at fixing some of those issues?
Yes, we've been working very closely with the personnel department over the course of the last several months. We started about a year and a half ago when we started to have concerns about what's happening with recruiting, because we could start to see that we were having more people coming into the process but less people coming out. So we've been working very closely with personnel department and trying to get a better understanding of why people are being disqualified, so that if there's something the PD can do on our side of it in terms of who we're bringing in the door, mentoring, working with individuals so that they don't get stuck in the DQ process, that's going to be very helpful. Right now there's a lot of unknowns for us in terms of why people are disqualified unless that individual appeals. Then we are brought into the loop and we see the appeals. So our concern over time has seen fairly similar, close to the same amount of numbers of people coming in the door and a lot less coming out the door. So what recently has occurred, as you know, the personnel department, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I know they're very much into the fire hiring as well. That is something that is on their plate that was not on there before. So we've offered to work with them on a piece of what we call the personal inventory questionnaire, which is after you take the written test, the very first questionnaire coming in the door. Offered to put officers on that to help them, hopefully give them a little bit of breathing room so we could pick up that component of it. It requires an MOA, and so we're in the process right now of working through that MOA.
Okay, so we think that will fix some of that backlog.
We hope so, yes. And we've been working with them identifying people who've been what they call soft denies or fix it,
right,
where they've fallen out because maybe they've had tickets or something along those lines. We've been working with them most recently and Captain Anita Ortega's with me today from recruitment, where we get those packages and we start to identify which candidates that were in the fix-it pool that we can bring back into the process by calling them and starting to mentor them sooner rather than later. In the past, we've always mentored people once they get into the full background. We're trying to step it up and start mentoring these people who fall out immediately to see if there's things we can do. We believe working collaboratively with personnel department we'll be able to still meet our numbers. We just are going to have to change our hiring because we were hiring every other month, and we'll be needing to hire every month through the end of the year. So we do believe we'll hit the 10,000 if we continue to work through the process with them. And if you want further, that's why Captain.
What's the authorized number right now?
I'm sorry?
The authorized number.
10,000.
Is the authorized number?
Yes.
Because that included the OPS.
Yes.
Okay. And so with that, I think it was important to put out all of that information for various reasons. One, it's in the FSR. It's going to continue to be in there. It's going to continue to be a budget impact. Personnel has taken on a whole nother responsibility with the fire department that they didn't have before. We haven't had a drill tower open in a number of years. So that's critically important to point out. And there were 17,000 firefighter applications on file within the city of Los Angeles. 17,000 for, 350, 400 or so spots. It's
monumental.
It's a huge number. And so while they're continuing to hire for LAPD, so certainly there was going to be an issue. I know we've spent a number of hours, both in public safety and in my office, going through this, bringing in personnel, trying to figure out how we can streamline this process, and making sure that we have enough police officers being hired. And it sounds like you guys are really on top of it, as always.
We are trying to be on top of it.
But the applicant numbers are still there. We're still getting.
Yes, the personnel department every year, and we will get their goal for us this year in January. They set a goal for the LAPD to recruit in. They have their own goal for the fixed site. It's not true recruiting, but it's the fixed sites where people go to the locations and do the testing. Is Gloria here? Oh.
Yeah, I didn't want to do too much of a deep dive. I think that was a good overview.
So,
but yeah.
Well, I guess Gloria has to come up like you.
Well, she might, because I have a follow-up.
Okay, come on up. Because I was going to say, I'm done.
Open
Question
mic.
as well, just to add.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
So
Okay.
they give us,
Gloria, have a seat. Come on.
we've been able to keep up with our recruiting numbers in terms of the who our recruiters go out to all the different sites and recruit. Their piece really relies on the advertisement and things like that, which I think is also in the FSR. So I'll turn that over to Gloria because I don't want to speak for your department.
Okay.
Yes, we had put together basically a target number of the number of applicants we want on a monthly basis, and part of the goal was also the numbers that LAPD brings in as a result of the pocket test, and the number of pocket tests that they actually handle. And then there was also a number provided or goal for our routine test sites that are held every week at Personnel Department, at Van Nuys, at Hollywood Station, and in San Pedro and other sites. These sites are ongoing and every day of the week. Yes, as the chief said, we use our advertising dollars to bring people to those static sites, the routine sites, and those numbers have dropped. But overall, I think we could, as the FSR includes, advertising money would be very critical given the number of competitive challenges we now have in law enforcement recruitment. There are many other agencies recruiting as well, some of which also have higher salaries than entry-level salaries than LAPD does right now. But we need to get the word out to even increase the number of test takers at the pocket tests as well, because we are doing a lot of work out there, but I think we'd like to even see those numbers increase as well as the static sites. We'd like to get some more candidates.
Do you have a history that you can provide on how many actual applicants we're getting now versus we got perhaps the same time last year?
Yes.
And month to month?
Yes.
If you could provide that, and you could report that back if you want to public safety, and we could have the discussion there, unless you wanted to bring that back.
I'd actually like, that was actually going to be exactly my follow-up question. So having that over the course of actually a couple of years at least
That'd be great.
would be helpful.
We can
That'd be
certainly
great.
get that to you.
Over the last couple of years.
And we also have it broken down with the static sites versus the pocket tests as well.
Well, if you could do that and bring that, perhaps if you already have that readily available, just since the chairman is asking for it as well, if that can come with the FSR to council, that would be great. If you already have
If it can be done that quickly, that'd be terrific.
That'd be great. Excellent.
Okay.
Because, we are in a much more competitive environment. Lots of other cities and other government entities are hiring now for the first time in a while because the economy is recovering. At the same time that we've cut our pay for starting salary for officers. So there's a competitive difficulty there, and so advertising is important, but I think everybody is aware of LAPD as an opportunity if they're interested in law enforcement. And so the question is, has that salary change and the competitive environment change made a drop-off in the number of total applicants. That would be an interesting first examination, and then within that pool, has the quality of the applicants changed? And that goes to, I think, the points that you were making, Chief, as well.
And a lot of the conversations, the sort of back at napkin, not scientific conversations that certainly I hear about from other officers and talking to candidates. A lot of officers know candidates that want to, recruit in and be LAPD officers. And the opportunity, a lot of people want to join LAPD, not simply perhaps because of the base opening pay, but the opportunity that they would never have in another department.
The big leagues.
It's the big leagues. It's prime time, and it's the best department in the country. And so with that, I've heard from some folks that the reason there's so much or some drop off for people not applying is because it takes so long to get through the system, and now that it's taking longer now, is that a reason for the drop off? So we're fixing some of those issues with things that are taking longer and some of the soft EQs, and so I think that might actually fix a lot of the problem, but time will tell. But seeing those numbers will certainly help as well.
And I just want to add one other thing. We asked, and they're giving us an expedited process for people who are in college and such, or out of state. They used to do it for us years ago, and we asked if they could step that back up, and I believe beginning of February we'll have that back in place.
Actually, next month.
January, okay.
Excellent.
So again, that's another piece of the puzzle.
As long as it's not like the planning department where they have to pay an expedited review.
they do not.
Okay. All right, excellent. Thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield?
When we're talking about the numbers of officers moving toward the 10,000 officer goal, what does that translate to the number of officers on the street, on any given day today versus what the goal is?
Well,
once we get to 10,000?
in order, if we hire an officer in January, June is the first time you will see them on the street. So what happens is, and what's concerned both the personnel department and the PD, is that not having enough people to start a class, we go longer and longer before we're putting people on the street that are replacing the people who are retiring. So it's sort of a rolling addition. So to keep 10,000 on the street, which is what we were very happy about, we were doing a continual every other month hiring, and that would have been sufficient until just recently, starting this summer, we saw a huge drop in the number of candidates that are, when I say qualified, that have gone through the process and have been certified that they passed everything. And simultaneously, that's when the personnel department started to have to work very closely with the fire department. They were cutting personnel. I sound like I'm doing sales for you, but the point being is,
keep going.
the point being is, there's a lot of different things that we think caused the drop. And now we're already starting to get behind the 8 ball, which is why we need to start hiring a class every month so that we can get that number of people back on the street, because we're going to start to see a decline now in the first of the year because we haven't hired any classes, or very few classes.
And what does that translate also to officers actually working on any given day, patrolling our streets? I mean, I know because those are two different numbers.
Well, these officers are replacing people who are retiring from the street.
Right.
So if we were to hire these 290 people over the course of the next 6 months, 50 people a class, then you would start to see us slowly go back to that 10,000. So you're talking about 200 people. Well, I shouldn't say that. You're talking about 150 people on the street that we have, because that's how we have kept it. So for every 6 months, you got 150 people. So if we continue to hire at the rate we're hiring, it'll be like adding about 150 more people on the street than we have now. If we hadn't had this lull, we wouldn't have been the 150 people short. I'm not sure if I'm being very clear, but that's one of the reasons we've argued, as you know, for many years in our budget, not to stop hiring and start and stop and start, because what happens is you see this big drop in the street, officers on the street, because these officers come directly out of the street.
And on any given, and so that's the overall picture on the street generically, but what about just sort of on a day-to-day basis? Obviously, not everybody's working on the same day.
How many people are on the street on any given day?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on the day, it depends on the night. We could report back, because it is a little bit complicated. Why don't we give you a report back on our deployment pieces for this? I think that might be something later on.
Because I would imagine part of it is we want to make sure that we have the right number, that we're not only keeping the overall number, but we're keeping the right number of people employed at each day.
Yes, and that's what's a little bit different than fire.
And if I can weigh in on that as well, it varies, particularly with CompStat. That's the beauty of CompStat, is the cops on the dots and making sure that they can move people around. And it's actually really intriguing. What I would suggest is, if you haven't had the opportunity to actually go to a CompStat meeting yet, it's pretty incredible. And that really gives you the sense of, when and what shifts and where throughout the city, and really gives you a great in-depth, and not one of the public CompStat, but the private CompStat meetings of where they're bringing in the captains and really drilling down into specific geographic locations by station, and it's fascinating and phenomenal.
And then he could also meet the Office of Operations Deployment Team, and they can get into the real details, because depending on the time of year, the time of day, the time of the week.
School's out,
Exactly. There's so many different factors that come into play, but it would be a great opportunity for you to really get a handle on our deployment, because it is quite different than any other department's deployment.
I think that's a good observation, Mr. Englander, that CompStat has allowed the department to operate more efficiently as well, by determining where and to what degree to deploy resources in a way that will have the biggest impact on crime reduction. So I think, to Mr. Blumenfield's point, it would be good to know, with all of those changes, I think it's important for the public to understand what the correlation is between that magic number of 10,000 uniforms and actual radio cars, actual motor officers on a given shift, just to put it into a context. And I think, that's sometimes kind of missing in a lot of this discussion. So that would be helpful to have. Thank you. Mr. Blumenfield, anything further on this?
No, thank you.
Mr. Englander?
No, I'm
anything
great.
Further? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right. Members, anything further on the FSR? All right.
Mr. Chair, we would just like to request that this file be transmitted forthwith to council.
Yeah, it can be transmitted forthwith to council with the amendments that we've discussed, which include deferring action on recommendation number 6.
Yes. And I think there's already a placeholder for council for Wednesday.
Very good. Were there any other changes that we needed to make that we discussed here today? They'll be captured in our report.
Right.
Yes.
Except for clarification on the gas tax transfers, the ones which were to be held in committee.
Yeah, we held that as well.
Right.
Well,
Until the report comes back?
That was not in the report.
What we held was the DOT's proposal to amend the report, so...
Okay, the amendment only,
Yeah.
Nothing that's actually in the report. Thank you.
Right. Okay, anything further on the FSR? Okay, do we have to take an action? Do we receive it? What do we do?
For which one? For the FSR?
For the FSR.
Just to
We
move
receive
it forward
it
to
and advance it
council.
forthwith to council. That'll be the action of the committee. We have one general public comment card? No, we have 3.
And on number 8, are we...
Okay, thank you. That's right, we haven't heard number 8. All right, so that brings us to item number 8. Mr. Ceja? Actually, we do have to finish number 5 as well, which we discussed briefly in closed session, but we do need to act on that in open session as well. So let's go to number 5.
Item number 5 is the City Administrative Officer and Chief Legislative Analyst joint report relative to the issuance of requests for proposals for the operation of the Los Angeles Triathlon.
Sorry to keep you so long.
No problem, Mr. Chairman. Terry Sauer, CAO's office. I'll make it quick. The CAO and the CLA are recommending authorization to release a request for proposal for the Los Angeles Triathlon. The current contract expires on December 31st of this year. The city has not been out to bid for a provider since 1997. Given the length of time, we would recommend a new proposal. And if approved by council, would expect to release sometime in early January.
So I want to take one brief step back and ask, why do we issue RFPs for the operator of Los Angeles Triathlon? Why isn't this simply done by people who are interested in organizing triathlons, and if they want to call themselves the official Los Angeles Triathlon, why don't they just come to us for, and in fact pay us for that right to do? Why are we issuing an RFP?
Mr. Chairman, the past practice had been to have an official operator and have a contract so that the exact cost, the city resources, there would be a portion of cost recovery for the city. There are other triathlons that do take place during the calendar year, but what the contract does, from other organizations, what the contract does is provide the city control over its intellectual property, over also the cost to the city. It provides us an opportunity to position LA. It does have potential economic benefit, and that has been the practice. Certainly you could make the case. Additionally, if someone is requesting and is an official provider, the city attorney has advised that that would be the appropriate method for selecting someone through a request for proposal process.
Paul Smith, CLA. One other important aspect of a contract is it allows the city to have a certain degree of control over the operation and the conduct of the race. It goes through many communities in the city. There are different needs at different junctures. The contract would allow us to identify those kind of community support systems that may be necessary. As you may recall, last year we had some difficulties with the AIDS Walk and an event on the west side. A well put together RFP with a contract to follow allows us to better manage the race and give support to the communities which it goes through.
Yeah, that's the part I guess I don't get, and it's funny you raise that example because for more than 25 years the AIDS Walk has been organized privately and funds a nonprofit, and it hasn't been, no RFPs have been issued, and it has been one of the most successful mass events in the history of America. So I'm not sure what, at a time when we're trying to consolidate and figure out what our core services are and all, I'm just not sure if running triathlons is really a core service of the city of Los Angeles. And I'm sure there's lots of people who like to organize these things who could, and if they want to get official sanction of the city of Los Angeles, there must be vehicles by which we can do. I guess here, let me take a step further back. Has this been something that has ended up costing the city money to operate triathlons? And if it has, what have been the economic development benefits that have come from that, if we know?
It would generate the triathlon. The current provider reports that over the years the triathlon has been operated is between 1,500 and 2,500 people. And keep in mind, triathlons are different from marathons because of the three different sports involved. And so typically you'd only have. I understand the official triathlon in Chicago has about 5,000 people, and it's largely, your size limitations are largely the result of how many people you can have in the water at any given time. In terms of economic benefit, it would be through TOT. I don't believe we have any studies other than what has been reported to us. Again, the purpose of the contract is more, you have a couple of things, but one is also the intellectual property and the use of the city's logo and the name, the City of Los Angeles. In terms of, there are issues which were touched upon in closed session, and we can have those discussions in closed session, but in theory this gives the city the control over the event when that particular event is run, and also control over the brand. Other events apply, other triathlons, other special events apply through the city's special event process. It's been the pattern and practice of the city for the triathlon and the marathon to have a specific contract for that event that's officially sanctioned by the city.
Okay.
And if it's an official city-sanctioned event rather than a special event that was pulled through permit, or whether it was or a council office or a department sponsoring or helping or contributing to that, where then they can then use the logo and say sponsored by, what's our risk and liability and exposure in terms of if it's an actual city-sanctioned event and there's an incident or a major incident?
We do actually require, in the case of the triathlon, there was an event, there was a claim against the city as the result of an auto accident. As an outgrowth of that, our risk management increased the liability insurance, all the liability, when the event is, both the marathon and the triathlon are held, their insurance is reviewed by the city's risk management, and if there's specific requirements, the city's risk management then will make a determination whether or not to adjust that. So, for example, in the case of the current triathlon, they have to have an aggregate liability of $10 million, which is well above what
the million that we have now.
And speaking to the chair's concern or recommendation and looking at some of the economic benefit that may or may not be able to be measured, or if we in fact may or may not have that information, do we know what also the costs to the city might be in terms of sanitation before and after the event, security, DOT, all of
the
those?
costs in calculating in the past 5 years, the costs have ranged between $190,000 to about $240,000 annually, keeping in mind that for both the marathon and the triathlon, there is a formula that was negotiated that's referred to as the marathon model, and what the proposer pays is the incremental difference on that event day as compared to the deployment on the prior 3 Sundays. And what we found, number of things, we are now in a position that we're more able to actually isolate those costs, that we have better cost tracking, but there are other factors that have impacted more so the triathlon than the marathon. If there are events that occurred in the prior 3 Sundays, for example, 9/11 deployment impacted the billing for the 10th anniversary of September 11th. If there's a major special event, that causes the cost to rise in those prior 3 Sundays. So the marathon model and the triathlon model are the same and represent a portion of the cost sharing.
Got it.
Over the term of this contract, the CAO and the departments have collected a lot of information about what the actual costs to undertake a marathon or a triathlon. And given that host of data, we can estimate about what the costs are on an annual
And the triathlon brings in, I'm sorry, how many participants?
Between 1,500 to 2,500. The marathon is about 35,000, but again, the marathon, they start at Dodger Stadium, they end in Santa Monica. It's a straight shot. What you have with the triathlon is that they have to start at the beach, and then there's the bike change, and then there's the run. So there's 3 separate events going on.
But I'm just curious, at 1,500 or so people, that's not a lot of people to be going through this kind of exercise with. And we had a parade yesterday that had probably 4,000 people, so I'm just.
Well, and that's one of the reasons to go forward with an RFP, is that what you would want is to see triathlon as a growing sport, and what you would want to see if there was an experienced provider that could come in and grow the event. As I mentioned, the largest triathlon in the country is Chicago, and that's about 5,000 people. What you really are limited to, you're never going to have, a triathlon will never be as big as a marathon because you can't have that many people in the water, even with what they call wave starts. So what we would hope is that someone would come in, and if the city wanted to go forward with having a triathlon, that it would grow it from, say, the 1,500 to 2,000 to a larger number.
So by going forward with the RFP, we'll see what's out there.
Right.
If
Basically.
nothing's out there, we can think of a different plan.
Right.
But I would recommend, I think, adding, in order to address some of these issues, I would like to add to the proposed RFP elements. The last one is reimbursement of city costs. I would like to add to that and likelihood of additional benefits for the city of Los Angeles, including economic development and revenue benefits.
And we'll
because some provider might, if there's 1,500 participants, I'm assuming 1,200 of them live in the Los Angeles area. So I don't see a huge economic side to this, but maybe there is, or maybe a new provider would get that by, taking it to a different level, so.
And that's what we would hope. There are a number of factors, again, that we could discuss in closed session that impacted.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
So,
But yeah, we would include that as part of any report back with any recommendation on what the potential economic benefit. We can work with LATCB because they'll have a good idea of what. We know what the value of a room night are, and we know what potentially the increase in room nights could be.
Great. All right. So with that amendment, members, any other questions? Okay. Then, as amended, that will be the action of the committee. Thank you. And that then brings us to item number 8.
Item number 8 is the City Administrative Officer report relative to the Standard & Poor's Rating Services updated report on general obligation bond rating criteria.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes.
At CAO's office, this is just to let you know that Standard & Poor's will be reviewing our general obligation rating. We had, Ben Seja and I had gone up to San Francisco at the end of October because they had released their new rating criteria, and we wanted to see what it was about. There were about 30 of us in San Francisco, about the same in Chicago, and a little bit more in New York. They had 3 meetings across the country to put out their new ratings criteria. Why did they do this? Because after the market fell apart in 2008, there was a lot of criticism about the transparency of the rating agencies. So they've decided to do a wholesale reboot of their general obligation bonds. General obligation bonds are those bonds that show up on your property tax when the voters vote for a bond. Why is that important to us as a city? Because that's the starting point for any of our bond issuances. So if we have a AA and GO bonds, we're usually 1, 2, 3 notches below that in our general fund debt, such as MICLA or the Convention Center. They told us they'd probably get to us hopefully by the end of December with our rating. San Francisco's been rated. A lot of the smaller cities in California have been rated already. So we're waiting for our rating. We talked to them, I think the second week of November. Jacob, we talked to them around there, second week or third week of November. They asked us, a million questions based on our new criteria, and we're just waiting to hear back from them on whether or not they're going to upgrade us, leave us the same, or downgrade us.
I don't want you to be in the business of trying to predict that, but in your experience, are the changes in criteria things that would generally seem to treat Los Angeles in a more favorable or less favorable light compared to other municipalities?
One of the main objections that most cities had to their new criteria was this institutional framework where they gave us a rating for the state that we were in. 5 years ago, I would have been concerned because the state of California really didn't have their act together, so to speak.
But thanks to the effort of Councilmember Bob Blumenfield, the state now has a balanced budget and will project a surplus for several years to come now.
Yes, so that has really helped us in the eyes of many because we are in California, and California has a lot of restrictions on us being able to raise revenue. So it's a positive for the city. And that's really the only one. Everything else, pretty much we feel we're in good shape. What they basically said to us was that 60% of the ratings would stay the same, 30% would be upgraded, and 10% would be downgraded. We haven't changed a lot. We've gotten better, I should say, in the last few years, but our structure hasn't really changed that much, I believe, to warrant the downgrade.
They said 60, you're saying of all municipalities, or they put that in there like a new
Yes.
curve, essentially, is what they're doing?
Well, they looked at their criteria, and I guess they looked across the country, and based on that criteria, they kind of predicted that about 60% of all ratings would stay the same, just because they didn't see.
It sounds like it's a funny thing for them to say because it's basically saying we're going to grade you on a curve instead of grading you based on your assets and liabilities. It's a personal beef. I'm really annoyed by the way that they do these ratings, and It annoys me that a couple of guys in New York can jerk us around. Nothing wrong with New York, but and they've done this on the state level. They're doing it here.
I know.
They completely ignore our assets and treat us in some ways like. And I'm just griping, but I'll stop griping. Maybe I'll put it in the form of a question. Did they talk at all about assets? Because part of the issue is that when they rate companies, they do assets to liabilities. But when
Correct.
they rate municipalities, they ignore the fact that we have tremendous assets that would, wipe away much of our risk. Did they ask any question about the assets that we have?
Not really. Their main concern in the financial end has to do with liquidity, how much reserve fund balance we have in the bank, how we're able to go through periods of stress, which we've, I think, very well approved to them that we could. We did what was necessary to keep us solvent during the worst recession since the Great Depression. And we always remind them of that we face our problems head on. The financial status reports, reporting to council when we have a problem. You should come visit my staff. They feel about the same way you do about rating agencies.
Yeah, and they have inherent biases too in terms of their
we deal with them when they ask us questions. The federal government has basically said you have to have a rating. That's the law. In order for our debt to hit the market, we have to have a rating. So we're very efficient and responsive to the rating agencies. When they ask us something, we give it to them. We meet with them once a year to go over our ratings in general. Then every bond issue has a rating. So that's the best we can do in dealing with them.
my frustration is not directed at you. On that.
No, believe me, I have had the same frustration.
Let me just
Yes, Mr. Engel.
close in the discussion real quick, if I could, just with a comment that I agree with a lot of those issues in terms of what some of the rating agencies look at. But in case they're listening, I want to say that they're really a great group of people. We love them a lot. New York is wonderful. It's known for their pizza. It's great weather.
Some of our very own council members.
Some people we know were born there, and we welcome them to our city at any time. And Merry Christmas to all the rating agencies if they're listening, and Happy New Year.
And the record they are listening. They absolutely are
so
listening.
just for the record, we like them a lot. We might not necessarily agree with them 100% on everything, but they're very good people with good families.
I should also note that while they do have great pizza, I'm guessing that New York does not have a 6.7% reserve. So just for the record.
Just so you know, our analysts are in San Francisco, and the city of LA demands that. When they try to switch us over to an analyst in New York, we balk. So we just got a new analyst out of San Francisco.
We like San Francisco, too, just for the record. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Anything further? All right. We'll have Mr. McQuiston on number 8. Mr. McQuiston.
Jim McQuiston. Of course, I analyze a lot of different cities and things. That's my job. But one of the things that bothers me in analyzing the city, we have a very balanced income. It's very, very stable. Even through our recession, we didn't really lose much, relatively speaking. And if you look at the criteria there, 30% of it is based on economic conditions. That really does not affect the city of Los Angeles 30% wise. So we're really getting hurt on that. And the thing that bothers me is that there's not enough emphasis on our management ability. And, I've had to sell things to the city of Los Angeles, and I must say that I will never sell anything to Los Angeles again, because if you think the state is hard to collect from, you should try to collect from the city. They will give you a stall for quite a long time before they pay, because they have their money out to loan. So I think that we should go after them and say, look, we have a solid record of management, and we do not have an ability to go down under economic conditions. So your rating system is just not right for the city of Los Angeles. You have to do something about that.
All right, thank you. So without objection, members will note and file that report. And that brings us to the end of our agenda items. Other than general public comment, we have two public comment cards. The first is Heather, and the second will be Mr. McQuiston. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I just have a general comment and a request. The request first would just be that you guys would put to a vote to place the medical marijuana file on calendar for Wednesday's City Council meeting. The council file number is 13-1300. There should be a piece of paper that has this information on it. The reason that I'm making that request first is that if you guys did want to do something with that file, it would need to be either voted on today and added on for Wednesday, or else you would have to do it first thing tomorrow morning to have it on the council file for Wednesday, just in case there's any actions that you would like to complete. The reason, what I would like to see happen is that either this committee or the Public Safety Committee to hold a special hearing tomorrow and request that the city attorney inform the committee about the outstanding civil cases that are pending against the city on this action. I know this is an issue that you guys are probably tired of hearing about. However, as a patient myself, I do have a disability, and I know that there are a lot of other patients out there that this is going to be a public safety concern from them if some of these shops have to shut down. And the issues that have arose based on this ordinance is that in order for them to get permits to operate according to the ordinance, it's going to take them 1 to 3 years to be able to get the state permit to become a hospice, home health care agency, those sort of things. Another concern is that it takes at least 2 years for them to change the status of their business model in order to operate as a not-for-profit business. So this has, been a number of the concerns that they're doing, and they're doing it as fast as they can, but they can't do it any faster.
Okay.
So that's my request.
Right. Thank you very much. That brings us to Mr. McQuiston.
Jim McQuiston. I've put in several things to several departments that we just have to change our ways because we're spending too much time on things we shouldn't be spending time on. If we have a law, we should obey the law and say, hey, you guys, obey the law. We don't want to spend a lot of time trying to get around the law because we just don't have the manpower and we just don't have the time to do that. The other thing that really bothered me was in the general services account here, we got an argument over a lease. I mean, can't our attorneys write or look at a lease and agree to something that they can live with and obey? It seems like we're unraveling here. And as you see, it does affect our economy and it does affect how we deal with people. And we don't want to alienate people and say that the city is bad for business and this, that, and the other thing. But on the other hand, we should be able to get the city attorney to enforce things. You noticed on item 4, all that stuff that he brought, and that's just one budget and finance meeting. There's got to be a little bit better decision. Trutanich would not settle that one case, and he ended up having to pay about 4 times as much. We have to get a little bit more at the basic level so that people know what the law is and know it's supposed to be enforced. And then once that's done, I think things will even out a little bit better. But as long as people get the idea that well, a law is something in the book, but we don't have to look at it, we don't have to obey it, and so forth. We'll get around it. We're not really the American way, as far as I'm concerned.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McQuiston. Our next order of business?
Next order of business to adjourn the meeting.
Well, then, that is what we shall do. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We are adjourned.